Hello and welcome to another motorcycling video. This is the second part of just riding the Spyder, and at the moment, if you'll recall from the last video, I'm going east from Goulburn on the Tarrago-Braidwood Road. I said that I would pass through a couple of settlements, Tarrana, which I'd passed through. I went past Wakefield Park racetrack and talked about that, then past the Inverrollocky College, and so I'll come next to a couple of small villages, Lake Bathurst and then Tarrago, and at Tarrago I'll take a right hand turn at the Loaded Dog pub and head on the Bungendore Road towards Bungendore, which is a slightly bigger town than those two, and it's about 30 kilometres from Queanbeyan. I won't get to Bungendore in this video, but I'll be going in that general direction. In the last video I talked about the state of the road a lot, and some of those comments will apply in this section. You'll see sections where the latest lot of rain we've had quite a lot around the area, has affected the roads quite badly, and I expressed some difficulties about managing the Spyder on those roads. Not that it's uneven or dangerous or anything like that, it's just that because it's as wide as a car, or almost as wide as a small hatch, you're going to get some places where you just can't avoid the pothole because they seem to be in the places, the tracks that the cars make. So you're going to get a bit of bumping and unevenness and roughness and stuff like that, which is just tricky to manage. So what I'm going to do today, I've sort of been a bit slack about getting this footage up because I've been trying to think about something to talk about, and I wanted to avoid the topic of the day, like politics and things that sort of flit into the news and last about 5 minutes and then we forget about them. So I wanted to talk about something a bit more substantial. So I'm going to talk about NAPLAN, and I'll explain all about that in a moment. So if you don't want to hear me talking about NAPLAN, or you don't know what NAPLAN is, or you have no interest in it, then you can do as Jackson Brown suggests and says, looking out at the road rushing under my wheels as the Spyder takes itself east and then south from Goulburn, and enjoy the scenery and turn the volume down. Now, for those who don't live in Australia, NAPLAN stands for National Assessment Program for Literacy and Numeracy, and it's a series of tests that are administered to students who are in years 3, 5, 7 and 9 of their schooling. And so children who are at about 7 or 8 do the first lot, those who are about 9 or 10 do the next lot, and those who are about 12 or 13 do the next lot, and those who are about 14, 15, maybe 16 do the ones in year 9. Now the tests are nationally administered to all students in all schools. You can get exemptions, and there are people who obviously don't do them because they're away sick or whatever event, but notionally every student in the country does these tests, and they are to assess students' literacy and numeracy skills. The literacy part consists of assessing students' ability to read and comprehend text, to understand something that's in front of them by answering a series of questions. Mostly the questions involve colouring in a bubble that's appropriate to the answer. They assess children's ability to recognise incorrect spelling and either incorrect or absent punctuation by again colouring in a bubble to indicate their answer. The mathematics, the numeracy component tests all aspects of mathematics, not just arithmetic, and again most of the time it just involves the children colouring in a bubble to give their answer. Most of the material is machine marked. The tests are administered to children in May of each year, and the results used to be returned to the schools in October, but I believe they've speeded the process up a little bit and they come in late August or early September. I suppose I should have disclosed at the beginning, I used to be a public school teacher for 38 years. I've been retired for 10 years. So although I've been out of the game for a little while, I suspect that many of the things that used to happen in NAPLAN still happen, and the process hasn't changed dramatically. When the results come out, the school gets each student, or the parent of each student, gets an individual report for each of their students that tells the parent the responses, which questions the student answered correctly and which questions the student gave the incorrect response to. It compares the student to the rest of the students in their school, and it compares the student to the national benchmarks according to what the curriculum says students should be able to do at that stage, whether it's in year 3, 5, 7 or 9. The school gets the same information, and the school gets a wealth of data and information. So I want to make a point here that NAPLAN itself and the testing that the data that's provided to schools is extensive and can be of great value. But the problem is we've been doing these tests for 14 years or so now, and they cost millions of dollars to administer and mark, and they take up an inordinate amount of teacher time. And it's a case of doing the same thing and expecting a different result. But the thing that is concerning everybody at the moment is the writing component. And when I say writing, I don't mean handwriting, I mean the ability to write a text. Generally what the students are asked to do is to write a persuasive text of some sort. And one example that was given a few years ago for students was that they should write a letter to the principal of their school or to a politician. In the case of the principal, they should write to the principal and say, think of a rule the school has that needs changing, and write a letter to the principal persuading the principal to change that rule. Or in the case of a politician, think of a law that needs changing and write a persuasive text to convince that politician to support a change in whatever the law is. Now, the concern at the moment is that the students that are in Year 9 are allegedly creating text with a grammatic structure that's equivalent to their Year 3 colleagues. And what they mean by that is that the students are using simple sentences. They're not using more complex and compound sentences with main and subordinate clauses. They're not using colons and semicolons. They're using very simple sentences and very simple punctuation to make their point. No comment about the arguments that they're making, but the comment is more about, well, how are they structuring the text? What is the grammatic structure of the text? Now, let me say at this point that written communication, being able to make yourself clearly understood, is an essential skill. When you leave school and go out into the world to do whatever it is that you're going to do, whether it's at university or in a job workforce or somewhere else, you're going to need to communicate with people, and you're going to need to make yourself understood. So being able to read, being able to write correctly, spell correctly, punctuate correctly, use proper grammar, correct grammar, is an important skill. I'm not by any means suggesting it isn't. What I'm going to talk about is some reasons why I think the students in Year 9 may not be performing as well as everybody thinks they ought to be. And I think that the first issue that I should mention is the 5-letter word that starts with C, that is COVID. For the last 2 or 3 years, going back to 2019, we're now in 2022, schools have been closed for sometimes up to a term. When it's been open, half the students have been away with COVID isolation, or half the teachers have been away with COVID isolation. When the schools were closed, they were supposed to log on to online learning, which sometimes worked and sometimes didn't, and sometimes the students weren't able to log on. Some students didn't have devices to log on with, and sometimes when they logged on, their teacher wasn't there because the teacher was sick and somebody else was doing the job, and so on. This went on for several terms over nearly a 3-year period, and even now there will be places where not all the staff are back at school yet because some are still recovering from COVID or other illnesses, and not all the students are back. And because we had such long lockdowns and such long absences from school, it is only reasonable to expect that students' performance on any sort of test, whether it's a standardised test like this or just a normal test that they would have in their classroom, would be impacted. We can't assume that just because kids are back at school now they've suddenly caught up, or that they'll ever catch up. I suspect that some students may never do that. Some students will take a long time for them to do that, and some will catch up fairly quickly. But that will vary from student to student and school to school, and it'll depend a lot on how much support the schools get in helping students to catch up. So the first issue is COVID. Now, the researchers who are saying that this concern exists and we need to do something about it say, well, they've factored in COVID, but there's been a decline in the quality of students' written work and in the quality of the writing that they're doing for some time. So COVID's a factor, but not the only factor. Let me suggest factor number 2. Almost every student, I guess from probably about Year 2 onwards, maybe even lower, maybe even most kids in kindergarten, I don't know, but I know lots and lots of students who've got this small device that they carry around in their hand that they have to be able to communicate with their parents and to be able to be told what the pick-up after school routine is, or any sudden changes in normal school routine, they can be notified of quickly. Everyone's got a mobile phone is what I'm basically saying, and on the mobile phone there are countless numbers of apps by which students can communicate with each other. And I suspect that except for taking a phone call from their mother or father every now and again to say, well, I will pick you up after school, or I can't pick you up after school, go to auntie so-and-so's or walk home or whatever, most of the time students are communicating with each other using some sort of messaging service, whether it's SMS or Messenger or some other thing like that. Now, the thing about those things is that they allow you to communicate with your peers in 140 characters or less. Sometimes I know now those things take more than 140 characters, but some of them still have character limits. They don't require you to punctuate. They don't require you to use capital letters. In fact, they prefer that you don't, and they allow you to use a shorthand. That means you can say many things in those 140 characters, or you could even just send emojis, and the person you're sending the message to will know what it is that you're saying. We put these devices in the hands of our children and we use them ourselves all the time, and then suddenly we want to say to the children, oh, but when you're doing this or that writing task, you have to do this. So I suspect that the mobile phone has something to do with the quality of students' written construction of written text. Essentially, when your child sends a text message to their friend, their friend knows exactly what they're saying. If they haven't spelled it correctly, their friend still knows what they mean because they use shorthand or they use emojis or whatever. And the punctuation doesn't matter because both of them don't care about punctuation. So that's reason number 2. Reason number 3 that I think that there's been this decline is to do with the task itself. I want you to imagine for a moment that you are doing one of 4 things. You're going to write a letter to the local council telling them about some issue that you're concerned about, be it a pedestrian crossing outside your street or traffic speeding down your street or something like that, and you want to persuade the council to do something about it. That's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is that you're sending an email to either someone in the business that you work in or to another business who has requested information from you for some reason. Scenario number 3 is that you're sending your friend a text message on your phone to say, let's meet and have coffee. And scenario number 4 is you're composing a grocery list. Now, scenario number 1, you know that you're writing to the council and say you're going to adopt a formal tone. You're going to set out your argument or what the problem is, and then you're going to think of reasons why the council should do what you want to do, what you want them to do. You're going to say to them the lives of children are at stake, safety is important, it's a dangerous situation or whatever it is, and you're going to be very careful to make sure that you spell everything correctly and that you use correct punctuation, because that's going to get you taken more notice of. Sending the email, you're sending it to either a colleague at work and you're sort of relaying information to them about the work situation, or you're sending it to a colleague in another work situation and you know that it's more than a friendly let's meet and have lunch. So you're going to be careful about what you say and you're going to be precise in what you say. Scenario number 3, you're just saying to your friend, let's have coffee. Your friend knows what you mean and you don't have to be quite as formal. And scenario number 4, you're writing the grocery list so that you come home with the groceries you want, or if you're sending somebody else down the street, they come home with what you need and not what you don't need. In each of those circumstances, you know who you are writing to, why you are writing, and what it is you want to say. And who cares? Who's going to read what you've got to say? In the case of NAPLAN, we're asking children to do scenario number 1. Write a persuasive text telling the principal this is a rule that we want changed, or this is a law that we want changed. We don't give the children a context. We don't tell them who they're writing to, why they're writing, who cares, or what it is that they're going to do. We're just saying to them, here, sit down and do this for 40 minutes, and at the end of the 40 minutes, pass it on to somebody else whom they don't know and who doesn't know them, and this person's going to mark it and look for whether they've used three persuasive arguments, whether they've used a sentence with a main and a subordinate clause and so on, not necessarily paying as much attention to the ideas that the child is trying to generate or the student is trying to generate as to the grammatic structure. When I was reading a little bit about this, I was reading that some researchers in Queensland had looked at it from a different point of view and said, well, under the rules and under the rubric, as they say, that is used to assess NAPLAN, some of the great writers of the last century, like Ernest Hemingway, would not pass NAPLAN. And I thought to myself, okay, think about this scenario for a second. Bob Dylan, for those of you who know music, was awarded the Nobel Prize for literature some years ago, and there's no way that he would pass NAPLAN. A bloke who writes a song that says, "It ain't me, babe," for example, isn't going to get top marks for grammatic expression. And you know that if you're a Bob Dylan fan, or if you know any of his music, that his lyrics can be quite opaque, and they take a lot for you to sift through the metaphors and the similes and the allusions that he's making in his music, or in his songs. Whereas someone like Paul Simon, for example, he'll talk to you and he'll draw you straight into his song. Imagine a song like Sounds of Silence, "Hello Darkness, my old friend," or "Homeward Bound, I'm sitting on a railway station, got a ticket for my destination." A completely different way of doing it. So what I'm saying is, the problem with the writing component of NAPLAN is that we're not saying to children, this is what you're doing, this is who you're doing it for, and this is why you're doing it, and these are the people who care. When somebody writes a novel, for example, they have a story that they want to tell. They have an audience in mind, and they have a way that they want to go about telling the story, whether it's a romance novel or a crime novel or an adventure or something. They have an idea and a structure of how they wanted their story to unfold and how they want their characters to develop. They have an audience that they think is going to want to read their story and enjoy their story, and they have a purpose. We're saying to children, here, sit down, spend 40 minutes writing this thing without any context, without any who's going to read it, who's going to care, what am I doing, why am I doing it, why do I care about this thing, where is my motivation, what am I trying to do this for? And then we're expecting children to churn out high quality work when that's an artificial way of going about what they're doing. Perhaps they should be just picking up pieces of written work that students have done throughout the year that's somehow related to what it is they're doing in their classroom on a day-to-day basis, and using that for an assessment. Well, the video is about to run out, so I don't want to tell you what to think. I just wanted to prompt you to be thinking about NAPLAN and thinking about this writing component. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's prompted your thinking, and I'll talk to you again in the next video.